Afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. We have nearly reached the end of the MWC Shanghai event. It has had a lot going on as we expected, and that's why we set up this session. I wasn't sure how many people would come given that we're this late in the event, but this is full, so thank you for coming and giving us your time. What we want to do is, some of you may have been here last year, and if you were, you'll have seen it then, but we run these panels with other analysts, great other analysts who I'll introduce shortly. But what we really want to do is just take stock of the big things that happened here. First of all, on the different topic areas, whether that's AI or on satellite or on monetization, and then put that into the bigger picture of what it all means. Because as much as we see the events happening at some place like this type of conference, it's not in a vacuum. Has read across to the other parts of the world and has read across to the industry. And it's really important to understand those implications given how fast things are moving in the tech world right now. So my name is Tim Hatt. I am the head of research and consulting with GSMA Intelligence. I'm basically an analyst. That's what I like to do. And I'm going to spend about 10 minutes just giving some top-line views on what we see as the big themes, but you didn't come here to hear me. I'm going to then bring the panelists up so we can have an analyst discussion, bash our heads together about what it all means. We will also leave time at the end for Q&A in the audience. There will be a microphone available, so I'll at that point give you a chance to put your hand up, and if anybody does have any questions, we'll do our best to answer those. So the themes are here. You can see these on the website, the MWC website, and I think I put these up here just to sort of give context of what do we expect to be the big talking points and thematic discussions here. And obviously a lot of it focuses on AI, but AI is not just one thing. There's many strands to it, which is why we have a kind of a Connect AI, how you look at all the networks, how you look at agentic, how you look at what telco operators and partners are doing with AI. You've got mobile AI in terms of how you use the LLMs, how that interfaces with consumers and businesses. You've got the enterprise dimension, and then we have a huge discussion around infrastructure in general, which is a very wide bucket covering anything from 5G Advanced through to 6G migrations. We heard a lot more on that this year. That's only 2 or 3 years away. It goes into satellite and NTN. Some of you might have been here yesterday. We had a summit on satellite and a great discussion, and there's so much in that topic alone. So we're going to look through all these, and I'm just, as I said, going to set some context for what we see within each of these areas. And as ever, I always say this, tons of pictures being taken, that's okay, you're welcome to do that, but these slides will be on our website. So don't worry about that. So when I go to the Connect AI, I think it's the whole move towards agents and the agentic economy, whatever you want to call it, has been in train for the better part of 18 months now. But we're now, I think, starting to get a lot more clarity on what that looks like in practice. This is data here from a network transformation survey we run, not just China, this is global. And the whole point is to look at what do operators see as their biggest use cases for agentic. How does that work into the network? How does that work in other parts of the business? And you can see that there's a huge range. There's not just one thing. It's partly in fraud detection, getting ahead of the security curve. We look at network optimization, but increasingly, and I think this is where what we want to get into in the panel, how does agentic work in terms of autonomous networks? How do you optimize network functions? How can you use that as a monetization tool? We see a lot happening in the customer care domain. I think we're now going to see that moving out to wider parts of the network strategy. And China is as ever, a leading country in that respect. So what we see here is perhaps a view into the future of what we're going to see elsewhere. I talked about 6G. I mean, it's a bit strange in a sense because 6G obviously isn't here yet. The standard is still being formed. we will probably get initial launches 2028, 2029, and then start to see wider scale commercialization at the end of the decade. But it matters because it's still been a nebulous concept to a lot of people. They don't really know what it means. And I think that, to be honest, is still the case, even for a lot of professionals. What we're trying to do is, I think, look at this from an impartial perspective and understand the use cases, but more than that, understand the business case. This whole question of 5G monetization and how you engineer more successful commercial strategies is a paramount point when you get into thinking about 6G. So whether that's in sensing, we hear a lot about ISAC, whether it's in native satellite integration, whether it's in assistance and agentic like I was just talking about, these are what the enterprise verticals think are most valuable to them. But you've got to match the supply and demand. And so how do you create that commercial business case, which really is more important than the technology? You can have the greatest technology, but if it's not solving an actual problem that people are willing to pay for, it's not sustainable. Now, part of the reason I say that is that you got to learn the lessons from the past. And the reality is that revenue growth has been under pressure for carriers for some time at different paces in regions. We're seeing sort of low to mid-single digit revenue growth overall, but with 5G, and this is just a selection, kind of a cohort of countries, even though penetration is now sort of 60, 70, sometimes 80%, the ARPU is going in the wrong direction. And so you have people, in theory, migrating up to a base that can offer, charging premiums and the ability to monetize that, but, competition has competed away those premiums, and there hasn't, I think the industry is still looking for that wow factor, which drives sustainable ARPU gains. So when we will talk about 5G monetization strategies, because we're actually starting to see a lot of differentiation there, more speed-based tariffs, experience-based tariffs, QOD, quality on demand, this type of thing to get away from purely volume-based pricing. These are important lessons to learn in terms of how you take the 6G business case going forward. We often talk about 5G and AI being brothers and sisters. They sort of they work synergistically, and again, that's a good idea, but does it work in practice? And so I put this slide up here because, again, this is data from our from an enterprise survey of multiple industries with a big sample size, like over 3,000 buyers. And you can see here, the data is showing their expected share of their OpEx spend on digital transformation, and the highest areas, not surprising, are in AI and 5G. So, in other words, enterprises do see the value, and they are putting capital behind it. But I think from a telco perspective and a vendor perspective, the important shift that we have started to see, and that I think will continue, is moving away from a connectivity seller towards something much more like a tech consultant, like an IT and tech consultant that works with clients over long periods of time to engineer that digital transformation to solve real world problems. I keep banging on that, coming back to that point, but that's the important message here about how we look ahead to 6G. So, a few more slides, and then we'll bring the panel up. So it does ultimately boil down to monetization, and you can talk about that in many different ways. This chart here, I'm just giving one example. This is from a report we've actually released yesterday on AI factories, which is essentially the concept is a specialized telco data center combining GPU capabilities with cellular and fiber assets. And the interesting thing here is that we're starting to see, and again, you see it in China especially, operators moving up to offer full stack solutions that bring in sovereignty dimensions alongside the business case for deploying inference workloads towards the edge of the network with various enterprise buyers. Check that out because there's the QR code is there and you can get that on our website. That goes into a lot of the financial modeling for what the revenue opportunity looks like. And we think here alone that could add 5 percentage points to growth. Sort of incrementally to the existing telco cloud business. So there are newer opportunities in play. I think that AI monetization is just a crucial one. Right, lastly, before we get into the panel, I talked about intelligent infrastructure. We've talked about the AI dimension in several forms. I would be remiss if we weren't to bring up a slide or two on the NTN competitive dynamics, non-terrestrial networks, because this has become a very fast-moving part of the industry. We talked about it in our summit yesterday, and I show this slide just to show the current competitive landscape, which is very different in China compared to the West. But in China, there is obviously a huge amount of scale, even though most of the satellites haven't been deployed yet, but they're planned. But the SpaceX IPO, which I'll come on to in a minute, and a lot of other consolidation deals we've seen in the last year, highlight the direct-to-cell, direct-to-device movement really starting to gather pace. And 2026 is an important year of commercialization. So I think for what we're looking for, and I will discuss from the event here in Shanghai, is what do those models look like? Is the distribution wholesale versus retail? How does that competitive dynamic evolve over time? And ultimately, for consumers, do they get a seamless, ubiquitous coverage experience where you have all land areas and people covered over time, which is not yet the case. However, and this is the last slide before I bring the panel up, it's an equally important question to look at grounding things in reality. So again, you can take pictures, but this will be on our website. When SpaceX put their IPO prospectus out a month or so ago and then launched it, it should be eye-catching that it is the biggest TAM of all time. They think there's about $29 trillion of revenue to go after. Okay. Our job is to sort of interrogate that and break it down. And if you look at the Starlink component of that, on the mobile side, you will have perhaps been surprised that they think the TAM is literally the size of the mobile industry today. If you look at the revenues of mobile service revenues and strip out China and Russia where they're not allowed to operate, you get to a number that's almost identical to what came out in the IPO. We think in reality that opportunity is a lot less, perhaps 5% of it, and that's what we would call a service addressable market, or SAM, compared to a TAM. But again, in the context of this kind of panel, when we look at those numbers, we want to look at the competitive implications of that, because this company is starting to accelerate movements in other parts of the sector that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise, or would have taken a lot longer. So there's a whole bunch of things going on. It's a very exciting time to be in the industry, as all of you will know. And yeah, we want to be able to put some stock on this from Shanghai. So you've heard enough from me. Those slides will be available. But now the fun part of the show, where I get to introduce the panel and we can have a great discussion. So if I can introduce Fanny Li from S&P, Tamer Jafar from Counterpoint, and my colleague Salim Wan from GSMA Intelligence. Guys, thank you very much for coming out today, and you guys are all very smart people, far smarter than I am, so I think the audience wants to hear from you more than me. But as analysts, I think we've got a lot to get through. I think some of you will, maybe Salim will speak in Chinese, and you guys in English, but just to reiterate, if anybody, for language translation, you can use the headsets. I will need one because I don't speak Mandarin. And we'll go from there. So we'll go for sort of half hour, 35 minutes, and then we'll build in time for questions. So if you do have any questions, save them up. We will ask them. We'll give you the chance to ask those. So let's start at the high level, because I tried to lay out the landscape of the big themes there to prime the audience, but maybe first just some overall reactions of the event. It's a 3-day event. There's a lot happening here. Timur, maybe I can start with you. Just top-line views of the event overall. Did anything surprise you or broadly go into your expectations?
Yeah, I wouldn't say surprised. I think it's a lot to expectations, but I think the key kind of themes I've seen are physical AI. We've seen a lot of physical AI, humanoid robots, IoT use cases as well around that, so industrial and enterprise use cases of robots. Yep. Beyond that, we've seen a lot of kind of connectivity enabling AI. So how can we enable AI use cases in the home, in enterprises, in industrial use cases again? So those are the kind of key themes I've seen, and the kind of difference that's not surprising, but is quite a contrast to Barcelona is monetizing tokens. And I think we spoke about it a little bit earlier. Yep. That's wording that we haven't seen in Barcelona, and yep. I think we're going to speak about it in more detail, but that's the kind of key difference that I've seen.
And we'll get into tokens when we come on to talk about AI monetization, but I'm glad you brought that up, because that is new, and that is very pertinent in China. Fanny, maybe I can come to you next before Celine. Just your top-line views on the event overall.
Sure. 那接下来我用中文来回答 Tim 这个问题。就是在这2到3天，我们在这个会议上有看到什么比较欣喜的一些新的产品。那其实我觉得比较因为我本身是从事这个汽车行业，所以来这个 MWC 看到了非常多的这个连接到这个 AI 转变的一个过程。比如说，我们可以看到这次的这个会议和这个展区，AI 其实赋能了很多这个机器人的行业。这个工业的这个工厂的这个 AI 的智能，以及这个 AI PC、AI 手机等等各方面的转变。那其中智能汽车也是其中的一部分。那我们可以后续再去看这个智能汽车的相关的转变。那第二个呢是说整个的一个商业模式。其实我是比较就是看到一个比较大的转变，就是说从这个流量的这个套餐到这个 token 的这个套餐，所以我觉得这个行业正在进行一个探索的一个过程，所以是比较去好奇接下来的这个商业模式是如何的这个转变的。然后第3个就是说5G在中国的发展其实它是远远领先于全球其他国家的一个发展。那就像我们的这个 keynote 说的这个40%的这个5G 的这个建设都发生在了中国。那其实作为中国的这个消费者以及中国的企业其实可以去探索很多5G 的这个商业模式。不管是在一些顶级的赛事、体育赛事，还是说我们的这个这个车站等等工业互联等等
Yeah, no, and the infrastructure migration you talk about is also very relevant. So we got tokens, 5G advanced, the move to 6G. Celine, what jumped out at you from the event overall?
我也会说中文，我觉得我的感受跟大家应该是非常相似的，就是大家去每个展台的时候，第一个感觉是不是觉得就是展出的产品类型很多，这是第一个感觉。比如说去年我们其实就已经看到 AI 和 Agent， 但是形式上面，今年大家会不会觉得形式有很多？就是我们有看到手机，有看到 PC， 有看到展出的手表、耳机，然后以及甚至玩偶以及等等，就是这个类型变得很多。就是消费者的 offering 至少就是说他在尝试。第二点就是说我们去看到 to B 的一些 offer 的时候。我们看到的是 PPT 对吧？大家会不会也觉得就是在那个 slide 上信息很多，然后大家其实都在给大家看一张 PPT， 上面是整个 AI stack， 他们都会给你展示它有很多的 offerings 在每一层。就是基础设施 data center， 他们有不同的 offer 的方式，然后他们的管理平台，每个人都会说自己已经有集成的管理平台，然后上面的 AI 的应用 也会发现是可以解决企业在不同的部门和不同的功能上面的应用，大家就会觉得很齐全。所以给我的总体的感觉就是说，本届其实我可以看到，无论是运营商还是企业，都在非常努力的去探索。哪一种模式，哪个方向，它能触达到它的 B 端和 C 端的用户，它能有一个商业模式活下来，然后它能去盈利。
Yep. No, thank you very much. So, okay, everybody has weighed in with their overall top line views. Good to set the scene. Let's go into the AI dimension a bit more. I want to talk about the agentic flows and robotics, and then maybe after that we can get into the monetization side. So Tamar, coming back to you, like there are a lot of robots on show here. If anybody hasn't seen it, you can go watch a football kickabout. Not sure how well they do in a penalty shootout in the World Cup, but there we go. That has moved on, in my mind, a lot from last year. Question to you, like how close are we to seeing robotics being deployed at scale in industrial environments? And does agentic AI speed that up, or is there still refinements you think that need to be done before you get that into scale?
Yeah, I think right after this actually there's a robot fight going on, so there's a lot of cool robotic features. But what I would say is it really depends where you are. So China does seem to be a bit ahead in some of these robotic use cases, and especially when you get to industrial use cases. Here we see a lot of humanoid robots. Industrial robots don't necessarily need to be humanoid. It's a very different ecosystem, and those type of robots we could see a lot faster because they don't really need to be humanoid. They don't need to move how humans move. So that's a lot faster. Some of these humanoid use cases are also moving really quickly compared to last year. You've seen big transitions, but I think it's a bit further away. And your point with agents, I think managing communication between the different robots, that's where that can come in, and kind of managing the overall top line view. I think that's where agentic AI can help kind of speed this up in a way. So that's what I would say.
And Fanny, I know you look a lot at the automotive industry, which is a natural place to have robots working in the production process. Like, are you seeing developments at MWC Shanghai this year of automotive advancements using AI and robotics?
其实是在这个汽车行业怎么会去使用这个机器人和 AI 的相关的一个演进。其实我们汽车行业在这个未来的这个几年中呢，有一些非常多的技术的挑战。其实两个这个 AI 跟这个我们的这个通信行业是非常相关的。
Maybe a little bit higher.
对，两个行业跟这个汽车是非常相关的。那一个就是说跟座舱的这个 AI， 其实座舱的 AI 跟我们的这个 AI PC 跟我们的 AI 手机的这个智能体是非常这个演进的路线是比较像的，因为在这个汽车的这个座舱当中，需要这个智能体可以跟用户非常多的一个自然的语音的沟通，然后更了解这个用户的需求，并且把这个复杂的需求进行拆解，然后执行在我们的汽车当中。那第二个汽车的这个 AI 演进呢，更多的是说和自动驾驶的一个结合。那我们知道，在中国这个城市自动驾驶是比较领先的。那其实我们有很多的初创公司以及这个企业的投资等等，最近也有一些初创公司进行了这个上市等等。那其实对于这个 L2+ 的这个演进呢，是大家都在去解决这个模型的一个问题，如何让这个模型更智能，更这个通用化，更了解这个周围的这个复杂的环境，然后做出正确的规划和这个自动驾驶。那在这个中国，我们也有法规的一个不断的一个演进。那比如说最近的跟 L3的一些的法规，以及这个我们在这个 L4不同城市的一个示范区的一个探索。那这两块是和这个 AI 汽车行业结合的比较紧密的一个地方。
And I think those examples are important to bring in because we do see that on show here, and that's a big part of the purpose of coming to an event like this. Celine, one of my questions coming to Shanghai is always, how realistic is that we'll see this type of technological advancement in other countries? Because China is very advanced and has a unique ecosystem. Like, coming back to the robotics point, do you think we're going to see AI-driven robots starting to flourish in other parts of the world?
就是先给大家一个数据，就是在半马，就是北京亦庄举行的半马，去年的那个冠军的机器人的时间是2分50多秒，然后今年的时间是50秒，他应该打破了男子的57秒的记录，1年的时间。如果你去对比当年 AlphaGo 打败柯洁的时间，那是5天，它可能会比较慢。但其实我们也很震惊，对吧？其实我能看到机器人有3点今年的改变。第一点是它变得更聪明了。它比起就是我给你一个指令，你如何执行？比如说我让你拿起这杯水，你就去拿这杯水；我让你去走5米，你就走5米，不是5.1，也不是4.9，它。Beyond 就是超过了这些，它现在在很多企业在努力去达到这一个 robot reasoning， 就是更好的去思考推理，也就是它会给它很多历史数据，让它去做一些思考，像人类一样。如果我让你拿一杯水，你不是去拿一杯水，而是思考都有哪些障碍阻止你拿这杯水，然后你要怎么去克服这个障碍，所以这样其实才能更好的像人类一样执行这个任务。而第二点呢，是我们的网络也在发展，我们的5G现在超过330个城市，然后有3000万的用户套餐的订阅，那这个无疑也增加了这个机器人连接的可能性。那这次的亦庄半马，它就是不是远程操控，而是自主的导航。那最后一点还有一个数据是，在真正的商业化上，去年应该是各个企业的机器人订单，应该是来到了500到1000这个量级。今年的话，大家给出的这个商业计划可能是会达到万级，我们现在还不知道。但是无疑，对于一些其他国家是在试验，我们其实现在已经来到了真正能够进行产销的这样一个过程。所以我觉得总结下来这一点就是说，我记得当时是在很多年前，别人问，造飞机的时候，别人问我人究竟能不能飞这个问题，就是大家想象了很多像鸟一样飞，但是最后造出来的飞机，我们是能飞了，但不是像鸟一样去扑扇翅膀。所以我认为最后的机器人它是可能的，但它可能不完全是和人的一模一样，而是说取决于我这个机器人是执行哪一种任务，那我就把它执行那个任务的部分的人做到最好，而其他的部分可能是以别的方式去实现。我觉得这样的机器人就是可行的，是现实的。
Yep. No, that's a good point. And I think it goes to a wider question, which we probably don't have time to get into, but of the interplay between humans and robots and how we set up the technology so that it's ultimately a force for good. And because I think there are big questions there. Before I get on to the next question, I said I'd come to the audience. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask the panel based on the discussion so far? If you do, just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to come round. If not, we'll keep on going and leave time at the end. I don't see any hands yet, so okay. We'll go on. If you do get, oh yes, okay. Please just do 2 things. Introduce, just say who you are and then just a brief question, please.
我是来自 MediaTek 的项目管理人员，我是会支持一些手机厂商的一些芯片项目的一些合作，但是我也是比较关注就是那个AI 在机器人领域的一些应用，因为这也是一个未来的趋势。那我这次来到大会呢，我看到很多了，就是机器人的应用是在一些灵活程度或者是一些物理层面，它的一些协调性啊这些方面。但是我是想，因为我在想嘛，最后就是下一代的演进方向会不会是 像人一样有一些嗅觉啊或者听觉这种，就是涉及到一些传感器的，就是可以一些跟生活中一些突发的状况进行一些交互的这种方向的眼镜，我是比较想问这个问题，就想问一下怎么看？
You guys want to take that? You want to go, Celine?
OK， 我觉得有一点吧，就是感知这个事情，其实一直也都是和下一代网络非常相关的。它需要很大的带宽、低的时延，以及说我能有一些硬件等等的设备支持我去进行这个感知。其实我记得。特别不好意思，但是我记得是在N3还是N2有一家叫什么 Intelligence， 在我的手机里有照的相。其实它有去做类人脑的类型的芯片，它可以更相似人脑的去进行感知。比如它现在推出了，你可以把它的芯片装在你的就是宝宝监视的这里面，然后它会去区分噪音里面哪些是宝宝的噪音，然后等等去做这些感知。我觉得，至于机器人是否能有更多的触觉感知，它依然依赖就是网络等等基础设施，是不是我们能过渡到后 5G-A 到6G？ 第二点是说，我们这些硬件的，包括芯片的厂商能不能持续的去投入，就是双方是一个协同的持续投入的过程。如果某一方是落后的，那这个事情我觉得会比较远。但如果双方的步调是一致的，我觉得就是这个就是下面的方向。
Okay, I want to let's keep going because there's a few other things. If you do have questions, just keep them stored up. I'll come to the audience once again. Tamar, you mentioned tokens, and I want to make sure we talk about tokens because this is new. It might not be new to NVIDIA engineers or AMD engineers, but I think it's new to a lot of people. And we keep hearing now about pretty rapidly this development of kind of tokenization of AI usage and how that could represent a new revenue opportunity for the mobile operators, as well as a way of managing network traffic. What is, I guess, two kind of questions. How what do you think of that approach overall? And secondly, what did you see at Shanghai this week on the tokens that may further advance that commercially?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot more talk about tokens here and how we can monetize them and how vendors such as Huawei, ZTE, how these guys can support their customers, China Mobile, China Unicom, China Telecom, to monetize tokens. I think it's one thing when you're doing it to a business. So a B2B approach, it's easy enough to just monetize tokens directly. Businesses, after a bit of time, they can understand how many tokens they're using and what that means for their business and what the kind of limits that they need are. I think it's quite different when you're at a consumer level because most people don't actually know how many tokens they use. If you use ChatGPT or Gemini, you just want it to work. You don't really want to think about, oh, I've got a token limit or how many tokens I'm using. So the approach I've kind of heard discussed a bit more informally, it's essentially signing up to a plan based on your use case. So if you've got a family use, a kind of hardcore researching use, just a casual internet search use, that would be a bit more approachable for consumers, and consumers would be able to pick a plan based on what they actually use AI for, and then the tokens, they wouldn't really have to think about the actual number of tokens, but it would be sold through a kind of plan-based approach. I think that would make the most sense.
How do you think, just one follow-up, how can you educate, because the point you make about people not understanding what a token is or how much value it has, how can the industry educate people on that?
Good question. I think some of it comes with time, kind of with megabytes and gigabytes, as we've seen with current mobile plans.
Yeah.
I think it takes a bit of time for people to understand that a YouTube video is a certain number of megabytes, live stream is a different number. So it will take some time, and as people use it, they'll kind of figure out generating an image takes more tokens than just getting an answer, a text-based answer. So that's one thing, but I think operators can be a lot more proactive and kind of give some key examples what they see their customers using. If their customers are generating videos or images, they can kind of give guidelines that a 1-minute video takes this many tokens on average, and that would kind of help customers understand. But the other point as well is that token usage is going to be changing as well. You know, it's going to become more efficient, so it's not going to be static. So this is a kind of ongoing process that we need to keep educating customers and how much tokens they're actually using.
Yep. Fanny, I want to come back to you still on the topic of AI monetization. You know, we talk about tokens, which is one potential monetization strategy, but there are a lot of others. I talked about AI factories a little bit. I'm interested in what did you see this week or hear in any of the sessions around changes to AI monetization models, and what do you think is most likely to be successful?
就是关于这个 AI token 这一块，其实我们的运营商有发布 token 相关的这个套餐这个可以根据比如说 token 的使用量以及这个和一些应用进行一个绑定流量等等。那我觉得这个其实这个样的商业模式在中国市场是可能是可行的，因为我们如果是去看一些数据。比如说 Anthropic，它的这个业务的增长，可能它80%的这个业务是给到了这个企业端，20%给到了消费端。那其实就是像刚刚这个分析师也提到的，就是 To B 和 To C 的业务。那其实 To C 的业务，有很多这个国内的大模型的厂商。都已经陆续的推出了这个 token 的套餐，比如说Kimi 或者是腾讯、阿里等等，字节。那其实整个行业的 token 的使用量是最近2年有1000倍的一个增长，那这个是一个非常巨大的一个增长。那其实 To C 端的话，可能未来的商业模式更多的是说月度或者是年度使用的这个套餐。那 To B 端其实它会更复杂一点。那这涉及到比如说企业和企业之间的合作，用哪一些的这个好的模型为企业的业务更好的服务，以及这个流量和这个模型，以及后面的这些智能体的企业应用。将它们绑在一起，作为一个业务流给到这个用户。其实我觉得，这个运营商的这个 token 的这个套餐，我们可以后续再继续观测一下这个 To B 和 To C 这2块的一个业务。
Yeah, and particularly as the large language models start to develop even further. It will be interesting to see how telco operators and others give their customers access to choice there and charge for it. Let's move on to satellite and NTN before we close it out, because you know there's a lot happening there, as well as in the broader so-called low altitude economy with drones and HAPS and so forth. The point I was trying to make up front is that there is a huge amount of scale going into direct-to-device. It's quite different in China versus other parts of the world. Maybe Celine, if I can start with you on this. Like, it's obvious that satellite is reshaping how connectivity can be provided. How do you see the differences between what we're seeing in China and maybe Asia compared to other parts of the world?
我觉得，当然，中国在卫星这方面其实有一个特点，就是它是战略导向的，就是政策导向的。现在世界上很多区域国家，包括美国、EU， 包括亚太一些国家也会有这种政策导向，但中国无疑还是这里面非常强的。这种政策导向其实在过去的10年、15年、20年一直都在引领。就是中国科技的方向，包括在10年前 AI 的发展，其实也是在这种政策方针下引领发展的。所以说，卫星的发展其实是有一定的政策的引领的确定性。 那其实卫星还有一点问题，就是这种引领为什么有一种优势，是因为就是卫星轨道的区域是相对有限的，所以一些比较早的进入，其实就是一个早的去占住这个位置，因为 ITU 其实也对于卫星的发射有位置间隔的要求。才能保证信号好的传播。所以呢，这种提前的行动，确实是一个中国比较标志性中国的一个特征吧。在2025年，中国整体备案了20万颗卫星在 ITU，这个数据也是有这样的一个支撑。所以在相应的生态方面，运营商如何接收这些逐渐发展的信号，他们去发展了很多网关和radio unit 这方面的发展，让他们可以在不同的海上、山上、不同的地形需求上面都有了这样的一个承接信号的硬件，然后以及芯片方面，大家自从去年获批了这个卫星的运营商直接直连手机之后，大家在芯片上今天应该也在 N4这个馆看到了很多对芯片的一个直接接收卫星信号的研发，所以现在应该是处于一个政策导向、运营商推进，然后生态正在发展的这么一个过程。
And Timur, before I come back to the audience, I just wanted to get your perspective on this as well. And specifically, do you think, so there's also the context, the notion of digital sovereignty. We hear it around sovereign AI, but in a satellite context, do you think sovereignty considerations are going to be coming into play? And is that something you've heard discussed this week at all?
Yeah, I would say so. I think with satellite, especially when we look in China, the operators don't really feel threatened by satellite. It's a complementary service. It's not really competing. But when you look internationally, you've got Starlink, for example.
Yeah.
That's competing directly, bypassing operators and going directly to the customer. And when you get to that kind of level, all your connectivity in your country is then based on Starlink, right? And that is a threat to some countries. They want to have control of their connectivity, and the best way to do that is through operators, national operators. So that's one kind of angle on the sovereignty side. And actually, even recently, just within the home network, the FCC had a foreign-made Wi-Fi router ban. So we're definitely seeing a much more kind of battleground around connectivity, especially when you see the home network, Wi-Fi connectivity, just connectivity in general. So it's it's no longer just about AI and high-level thing. Connectivity is seen as the next kind of layer to the sovereignty angle, yeah.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to just come to the audience one more time. Are there any other questions people would like to ask? And if so, please put your hand up. Yes, sir. Please just try to keep the question brief.
好的，谢谢。我是一名个人投资者，然后我想问的一个问题就是，其实我们今天看到很多的 AI 还有机器人，但是我最终的一个问题想问的是 ，AI 和机器人最终与我们人类会怎么共存？因为我在上海其实有一个明显的感受，就是在上海临港，我在那边住，已经看到很多有那种无人小车在路上跑。那么我直接想到的就是，我们上海可能有数以百万计的这种，或者说从全国来讲数以千万计的这种外卖员，他们未来是将会在原本他们所在的城市就地去升级，找到别的工作，还是说会引发一个，比方说在中国内部来讲，或者全世界内部来讲，大规模的一个人口的重新的流动？因为这个问题的话，其实抛出来。我希望嘉宾给出的答案是一方面从你们研究的非常熟悉的一个小的点，就是可能某一个工种会给这些人带来新的机会；另外一个从一个宏观层面来给我们做一个大胆的预测，就是这些人能就在他们的城市原地升级找到新的工作，还是说很多人要从东部移到西部去开疆拓土去了，因为东部已经没有足够的工作机会给他们。谢谢。
Do you guys want to go, or shall I respond to that? Want to go, Fanny? You?
我大概回答一下，就是这个的一个看法，就是说，其实我们有的时候内部也会在讨论这样子的问题，就是说，比如说现在的这个做这个行业研究，那以后这个 Gen AI 到来了，是不是比如说很多的这个白领的工作将会被流失，但是其实我们会看到，就是不管是从马车时代到这个汽车时代，还是说很多次的这个工业革命的这个技术革新，其实在某一部分的这个工作它会进行一个转型，那很多的这个人他是可以去一些新增的这个应用和行业里面去得到自己的这个就业，那这个会涉及到后面比如说社会提供的这些技能的一个培养，那比如说是。在这个，比如说是拿这个研究工作来说，那很多的这个分析，我们之前是用手动的，但是如果再结合着这个 AI 和我们的日常的这个分析的工作，我们可以发现，很多研究的效率会大幅度提升。那比如说50%以后的工作给到了这些 Gen AI 去解决一些繁琐的这些问题了以后，另外50%其实更多的是需要，比如说人和人之间的这个沟通，以及这个我如何去想一些更有创造性的这些事情，把我的这个有限的精力投在这些更加有意义的事情上。所以就是说，大家可能需要去适应如何去和这个 AI 的工具更好的相处。
It's a good question. I mean, that, to be honest, you could have an entire summit or event on that alone. We are going to be engaging in a lot more research on that question, so thank you for it. So last question, because we just got a couple of minutes left, and if anybody else does have questions, we'll just have to take them after offline. Well, I think we don't have time to go into any more here, but if the panelists have time afterwards, I'm sure they'll be happy to speak to people individually. But I do need to wrap up quite shortly. So just one final question. This is the lightning round, where I'm going to ask for a 30-second response. No longer. You'll get an ugly bleeping sound if you go over it. No, I'm just joking. Lightning round response on biggest thing we should be looking out for over the next year. Out of all the things we've talked about, and you can keep it to China or more broadly, like biggest factor that can cause change in the tech and telecom sector over the next year, and yeah, we'll leave it at that. So maybe Fanny, start with you. Just a super brief response.
我觉得未来的这个1年，我可能更关注的是，比如说5G的这些行业应用是如何的这个落地的。我更希望去看到更多，比如说5G和这个人工智能和我们的这个人形机器人相关的一些结合。那同时我们也看到了一些运营商的商业模式，我认为这一块也是会持续的去看这块的这个商业模式的一个to C to B 的一个应用。
Okay, so using 5G to drive robotics and a monetization story there. Tamer?
I would say two things. So one would be the role of operators to moving beyond just connectivity providers and becoming kind of AI providers or AI enablers. I think that would be very key. And then how to monetize this, right? So the token point, how they will communicate AI monetization. I think those will be the two kind of key things to keep an eye on in the next year.
Yeah. Celine?
So I will be hearing that B.
Don't worry about it. We'll give you another 20 seconds.
我觉得是2点。一点是那些运营商或者说 AI 解决方案的提供商，他们有多少程度知道自己客户的 business model，就是他们要去计算他们优化的这些服务和人力，至于他提供的服务的定价是否合适，他就能够卖出更多的解决方案。第二点是它的成本。谁最会优化它的 token， 以及谁最会优化它的算力的就是算力放在哪儿去算，然后如何消耗它的算力，它就能更好的控制它的成本。这个成本的情况会是谁接下来能够 survive， 然后以及能够继续成长的关键。
A good range of responses. As I say, we could talk about this all day, and I'd happily do that. But as ever, we have limited time. And as we are near the end of the event, it's not quite over. There's a couple hours left, but this is near the close of the end. Do you guys mind if we get a quick selfie on stage? Do that, and then we'll close it out. Everybody's got a wave in the background. All right, go on in. Ready? Everybody wave. You're going on camera. All right. Guys, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for coming out. I hope you've had a good event. Safe travels home, whether that's to China or elsewhere. We're super pleased that you could come out today, and hopefully we'll see you again next year. So thank you very much. Thanks, guys. Cheers. Thank you.
感谢您参加 MWC 上海展会。离场时，请务必带好随身物品，并将您的同传耳机交给工作人员。祝各位回程顺利，期待在明年与各位再次相会。